Hello all, and for this video I figured we'd be cliche and kind of do the yin and yang thing from the last video where we talked about death and paid respects to our friend on the channel. I kind of wanted to share some thoughts on life and, some of the things I live by. I've been, not that I think I have things figured out by any stretch, but I kind of wanted to just lay out there some advice that I would give maybe to some of the younger people that I been told watch my videos and whatnot, or maybe some people in the same age group that could maybe want to at least share a sentiment of expression, if you will. And one of the kind of funny phrases I like to throw around at my friends a lot is about how life is just a LARP, and we're just all kind of like these players, playing this game. We just kind of have these intentions, these wills, and we use that to kind of form this, almost social media mask, if you will. I know Zizek talked about when he kind of like looked at the Joker. He was kind of pointing out how we kind of choose the mask that we wear, and so like the mask that we choose is actually more important than the mask itself. And I think that's really true for when we kind of look for intentionality, and you look at kind of like YouTube algorithms, and I pointed this out in past videos, where you have all these kind of like self-help things, and so people are having like this intentionality to better themselves somehow, and they're looking to content creators to gain some kind of knowledge or something like that to better themselves, some kind of skill or something like that. But more than that, I think you see that definitely in how popular and how big the field of psychology is now. And psychology, as I've kind of like talked about in that depressed men video, I think there's a lot to be said about it, in that psychology just kind of like takes a look at someone. It's like, hey, this is what we think is like making you not normal. This is how we could potentially do it through either, usually it's drugs, but there's that. You can use drugs, or you can go and use these, therapy or something like that. I don't want to just like kind of say that there isn't other, possibilities out there, but for the most part, this is most people's like option, is either to try to deal with like side effects through pharmaceuticals, or kind of like express themselves through this kind of like therapy approach. And for the most part, at least for men, in my opinion, and as someone in my own personal experiences, I've kind of shared on this channel a little bit now, but I've dealt with depression my whole life, even as a young adolescent, probably earlier than most kids. I am very high on neuroticism, so I do kind of have a little bit of experience when it comes to someone. I don't want to, and I'm not trying to come at this from a woe is me attitude. I'm kind of just trying to share that I've been there, or I am still there in many ways. And so I think when it comes to like psychology and it comes to therapy, for young men, as I pointed out in that depressed men video, it just kind of comes at it from this embracing of yourself. And for most men, that's the opposite of what they actually want. They don't want to actually be who they are right now. They want to take part in that immerseful struggle of actually becoming something else, because that's what human beings love to do. We want to go past, we want to become something else. And I think in order to do that, you have to kind of look at it with life kind of as a LARP, because you kind of have to tap in, outside of yourself. You kind of reorientate yourself outside, or try to. And in order to do that, you have to kind of fake it until you make it. And so you kind of have these, like, a path of, like, intentionality towards it. And you might be able to look at some kind of creative, genius to be able to figure that out and kind of replicate it. And that's not a bad thing, of course, but, so I guess I kind of wanted to share why I kind of have this motto of life as a LARP, because, I think a lot of people, when they look around and they see this, everyone kind of always says, oh, we're so consumerist, all we do is just consume and consume and consume. And, I'm not saying that that's not relevant, and that there's definitely a lot of problems with that, but I think that also lacks agency, and that I don't think that we're, the fact that we're even discussing, the fact that we even care enough to point out that we know, we're conscious of our consumption, shows that we actually aren't just necessarily consuming, but we're actually, actors in this play, and we actually have a relationship with these things, more than just trying to find, the truth to it. And I think that's, like, one of the things that a lot of people share, maybe in this political scene, if you will, this kind of, like, outsider approach to things. I personally, I actually kind of look at it from a different way, maybe, and I look at it more from this kind of American pragmatic culture and attitude has, just led to this, really just this, self-wallowing, can't look themselves in the mirror culture. Because ultimately, like, I think the pragmatic attitude, that, I'm not saying that pragmatism isn't a good thing, right? I'm just saying that, personally, the joy I get out of life actually comes from the performance of these things, as opposed to actually the results. And so, for the pragmatist, politically, if you will, kind of like way, on this channel, since I have, like, the political science, like, background, if you will, when I think back to kind of the campus conservative talking points, if you will, I think back to anytime it got pressed on these kind of institutions or ways of life, such as capitalism or liberty, or things within, like, the tenets of the Bill of Rights, and such as freedom of speech. It always kind of goes back to the utility of it. It's not, like, actually, it's not really referenced much about the golden rule of it, if you will, in a way. It's more about just, oh, well, this is like the recipe, it's kind of that abstract, well, not really abstract, but it's kind of that, it's almost like read, and, it's almost read as if, like, it's like a cookbook of, like, this is like the temperature and, like, of the condition that you want, that's gonna make the most amount of people free and happy and all that kind of stuff. But I think for the pragmatists, they kind of actually miss one of the great joys in, like, actually taking in the journey of it in and of itself. And if you want to get really morbid about it, look at Spengler's takes on Prussianism and socialism, where he kind of looked at all of the different European revolutions. And he said that the Germans were just terrible at it, and the French, they just reveled in it, like they just loved every second of it. I think that's kind of what I'm getting at, since I do have a French father. They when the guillotines came out for them, they reveled in every second of it, as opposed to the English, who was just about getting that result. They just wanted to win. We needed to win, and we'd do anything for it. And one of Spangler's other takes, and I think I kind of want to go down this road in this video too, and how we conceptualize these civilizations in particular, is when he was comparing us and the Romans, and he was saying that these were like pragmatic people, but as he said, the pragmatic people were just boring. They missed the point. And so I think when you look online, and not saying that I would consider myself one in this group, or that I live my life like them, but when you kind of look at the Bronze Age, a kind of bodybuilding group on Twitter and right-wing Twitter, they oftentimes, it's kind of that Greek, fashy physique that they're striving towards. And it's just kind of funny that when it comes to aesthetics and these kind of ideals, we refer back to the Greeks, and it just goes to show that kind of like longing, I think, that's kind of like hidden, deep within, of that kind of idealism, that kind of despite even getting potentially burned by that pragmatic that pragmatic approach to ideology. Despite that, people still want to go for the ideal. And in many ways, I would actually argue that a lot of these pragmatists or pragmatic views in American culture is an ideal in and of itself. In that I know there's a lot of, obviously you can kind of see it on that it's not necessarily in absolutes, right? But when we're describing American culture, pragmatism is definitely looked at more than something like ideals. And I think that kind of dichotomy is actually pretty fascinating and doesn't get brought up enough in American culture. And I think you kind of see that that kind of underpinning, if you will, with like the underdog and the hero in most of what's considered the good movies and good shows that have came out in the last 20 or 30 so years. And it's the same kind of like archetype, whether it's the anti-hero or not, is like it's usually an underdog in for Americans, and the hero doesn't really have much to like back up his confidence at first, but pragmatically, or from a rational point of view, he should just probably give up and just not even bother. We kind of brushed up on that last video where I said, I gave that Voltaire quote about God being necessary, and how this is one of the great French rationalists, and he's even saying in his footnotes about how God would be a necessity, even if he wasn't there. And so I think that's kind of like partially what I'm trying to get at with this video, is like I didn't, anything that I've ever like really tried for, I've pushed for the absolute ideal, and I think people really want that deep inside. That's why they're posting the pictures of the Greek physique, or they're going online, and you have people who are willing to throw away their health, their longevity for this kind of physique right now. And like I said, like I'm not necessarily saying like, oh, go out there and just be an absolute idealist, or pragmatism bad. What I'm getting at is like it's kind of like the will to idealism, and I think that it's coming more to fruition. I think more people are getting drawn into that. More people are looking around. Like, one of the more interesting thinkers I think that I kind of relate to, and that's Charon. And Charon, he's the Romanian self-deprecator. He hates his own culture. He hates everything about himself. He hates life. His works are. He's very troubled, just like anxious and troubled, and just like I was in my early years, as I kind of went down this like academic road of rationalization, and I had no spiritual conception at all. I mocked the religious. I really resented how I had to go to my Catholic schooling outside of my primary school. And so with Charon, though, I think he's really interesting because he ends up being like really fashy, and it's kind of funny because he's like the opposite of what you would expect. You would expect him to be his contemporary, like beta soy boy, and I think even like leftists would agree with that, because he's just got this woe is me kind of attitude, and that's not exactly someone that you would think of as like some strong conviction, high disgust factor fascist, right? But with Charon, I think he just kind of gets fed up, just like I think a lot of people are now with things. And he says, what if, despite life just being a joke, really, and, there's nothing to this, there's just money, and, we barely get along with anyone, and, you didn't even ask to be born anyway, so what the hell. But, he says you can just, obviously that's his outlook, but, as he kind of ages, he says, well, like, what if you just, like, went fucking full-blown discipline, and, like, what if you just fucking went wild and actually started to believe, and, he just basically went to the exact opposite of what he was, like, going for earlier in life. And I think that kind of sentiment is deep within, and I think you see that with the kind of culturally with the underdog. He's he has this he has the confidence to go for the ideal, because if based on like where he starts off at, right? He's not a master at all. He sucks. Like, he's terrible at what he like starts off at, and or his influence is very little, but he rises up, right? That's that kind of American dream, aspect to it, right? But in the end, he is kind of just LARPing, right? Fake it till you make it. So the hero just kind of stumbles along, and yeah, if he would have just like applied, rationale, or just this psychology attitude that's taken up in our culture of just like accepting yourself, and not actually challenging and putting quite literal suffering, I guess, if you want to get Nietzschean about it, to yourself, to confront that and actually come out something greater, which is like a theme on this channel, as I've been talking about, with like left-wing representation just being a sham, basically, and those kind of concepts. But and this kind of gets into the fundamental spirit of that Depressed Men video, where it doesn't really matter this kind of elaborate solutions for, whatever we want politically even matters almost as much as whether or not, we've been on this almost decade long debate about whether or not Western civilization is even worth like redeeming and looking ourselves in the mirror. And until that actually happens, none of these like concepts mean shit. They mean fuck all, because without that intentionality of survival, uh, ultimately devolves into meaningless, and there will never be anything kind of culturally creative that would actually, have us embark on a different kind of journey, if you will, than this kind of really dampen, kind of block in continuality, if you will, that I think most people recognize, but it's kind of like gridlock and closing in, if you will, and just this kind of like, it's like if if this was just like a current of water, if you will, we're at this point where there's just a bunch of rocks just cover, and there really is like no flow of water into that other side anymore, or it's it's at a very slow drip to the point where we don't even consider that it'll go on. And I think that reigns true when it comes to getting into these debates. It's the whatever ideal that gets you out of bed, if you will, that gets me out of bed. It might not, it'll more than likely fail, and I think that's like part of the point too. Is like, what are your ideals when you know that they're likely to fail? And I think that in and of itself, being able to embrace that, actually show, in a way, has self-actualized for me, what I really stand for, and knowing that it could be this infinite loop of like nothingness. Despite that, still, what is my ideal? What is gonna like get me to rise up? And what is important? What is beautiful to me? And I think a lot of people have that. They have that ambition. They just don't want to get made fun of for it. Nobody likes to kind of everyone thinks that they're not wearing their heart on the sleeve, if you will, when it comes to these kind of debates. But I would argue that we don't do that at all. And to kind of like argue about that is a waste of time, really. And what it really is about is ultimately like, what is your actual ideal, even though you're probably not going to get that result. And I think when you look at things such as my history for something, what people would consider vain, like weightlifting or something like that, despite the fact that my technique was horrible or something at different points, I still went on this journey of progress. I still had these like tangible gains over time, even though I would argue in many ways that I was doing stuff that I would never do today. And so I think that that's important to take in how to actually live your life, and especially examine politics. Yeah, so I think that's gonna wrap it up for this one. Thanks for watching.